Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for being there. So, today's session is going to cover fast tracking the commercial carbon management technologies ecosystem. And we have an esteemed panel in place. Let me take a minute to introduce all of them. To my left, we have Fred Majkut, SVP Carbon Solutions SLP. Fred is Senior Vice President of Industrial Decarbonization, looking after global CCUS and hydrogen businesses for SLB. Prior to being Senior Vice President of Carbon Solutions, he was also looking at worldwide CCUS operations. And Fred has also been Director of Marketing and Strategy for SLB in the Asian Basin. Welcome, Fred. We also have with us Saloma Yomdo, Director, Exploration and Development, Oil India Limited. Shri Saloma Yomdo, he's assumed the position of Director in Oil India, a graduate in petroleum engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, Indian School of Mines, joined Oil India in 1994. Yomdo actively implemented various exploration, development, as well as reservoir management practices in Oil India, oil and gas fields, addressing challenges and achieving breakthroughs through fit-for-purpose technology and geoscientific studies. So, welcoming Saloma out here. Next is Henrik Inadomi. He is EVP for New Energies Aker Solutions. Henrik is appointed as Head of New Energies. He has extensive experience in petroleum and energy law and projects. He also has had experience working with Qatar Aluminium and Norsk Hydro. Welcome, Henrik. We also have Aniruddha Sharma, Chair and CEO Carbon Clean. Carbon Clean has been pioneer in bringing about point-to-source carbon capture scale-up technologies, reducing cost. Their innovative solutions on the CC technology is something that is seeing implementation under Aniruddha's leadership. Carbon Clean has expanded globally in US, Canada, Middle East, Europe, as well as Asia. Welcome, Aniruddha. And last but not the least is Mr. Balasaheb Darade, founder and managing director of New Era Cleantech. Mr. Darade has played an innovative role in having approvals for gasification, for coal gasification projects in India. Coal to chemicals has been a big value chain across different parts of the world, and he's trying to bring that to India as well. So, welcome all of you, and I'm really excited to have this panel with people with different experiences coming together. Now, to bring in some background, decarbonization and carbon management, they are not neologs any longer. If you look at the world around and IEW, the focus has been energy transition and decarbonization. CCUS and engineered carbon renewals are also seeing a lot of announcements globally happening. Wood Mackenzie, which is where from which I belong to, has a tracking of almost 1,300 projects globally with announcements of 2,000 MTPA of CCUS capacities being announced across the value chain. So there is a lot of rigor that's going around in this technology, and we are meeting up over here to discuss various aspects of this technology. Our forecast indicate almost 434 NTPA of CCUS technology being set up in the near term, which is the next 10 years globally. And of that, almost 130 MTPA would be in Asia Pacific. So, what is the role that India is going to play, and what is it that India needs to do to scale up in this place is what we'll discuss today. For the purpose of ease, I have divided this entire session into three parts. The first part would deal with ecosystem readiness. The second part is something that everybody is worried about, which is cost and scalability, viability of projects. And the third one would deal with recommendations. I hope that I'll have some time to also take questions from the audience if possible. So let me pose my first question to Fred. Fred, there has been a lot that has been spoken about capture technologies, and the largest part of the cost is a part of capture technologies. If you look at announcements, you will see that players today are having larger announcements on the storage side than on the capture side of it. So it would be great to understand from you what needs to be done to improve emitters' attitudes towards setting up these capture units?
So I think when you look at the value chain of CCS, in order for emitters to effectively deploy more capture units, the economic viability of the value chain has to be demonstrated. Effectively, nobody would sanction a project if the economics of it don't make sense over the long run. In the long run, we're talking 20 to 30 years. So when you look at the value chain, obviously you have cost associated with that activity taking place, and capturing the CO2 is obviously a large part of the cost. Then you have a transportation and storage, and then you have a question of, is there a revenue associated with that, or is there a revenue model? So if you are to store the CO2, effectively the only revenue model can be in the form of carbon offsets, can be in the form of carbon removal credits, CDRs, or can be in the form of cost avoidance. So that's already the, let's say, the underlying element that we have to keep in mind looking at the value chain. Now, across that value chain, for many industrial sectors, the cost of capturing the CO2 is the largest spend. And effectively, I would say the economics are very different from one sector to another, are very different from one region to another. The cost of electricity, for instance, is a significant part of the OPEX associated with the CCS value chain. And fundamentally, I think if you're looking at possible avenues for the cost of capture and effectively the cost of CCS to go down so that more projects are actually economically viable, you're looking at a combination of factors. You will have to have technology disruption, meaning you will have to bring to market technologies that enable that to take place at a lower cost. You would have to have scale up. As you repeat, as you build more of the same, you effectively become more efficient, and you have a learning rate that allows you to bring the cost down. And effectively as well, you need to have integration of partners where the ecosystem works. When you look at what it takes to develop those projects, you will need technology providers, you will need EPC companies, you will need pipeline/infrastructure partners, you will need subsurface pore owners, you will need financiers, and obviously you will need public support. So all of these actually come together in order to make projects go through, but that's a complex ecosystem. And that's why there's been, let's say, fewer FIDs taking place versus what one would have hoped. Yeah?
Okay, cool. So because Fred has brought about the point of disruption in technology, I'm breaking the flow that we had decided, and I'm going with Aniruddha next. So, disruption in technology is what, Fred commented upon. And capture technology is disruption, and innovation in that is something that your organization brings about. So tell me, is there a scope where the cost gets reduced actually with usage of your technology? What are the kind of use cases, best practices that you have been able to bring up internationally, which can actually improve adaptability of capture technologies at emitter end?
Thank you, Hetal, and thank you for having me here. I think it's a very good question and a little bit complex as well to answer the question. I would say there are maybe three elements of reducing the cost when you look at the cost of carbon capture. The starting point is carbon capture is very well known. I mean, people have been capturing carbon dioxide in oil and gas industry for almost 40 years. The main adaptation here is that you're trying to capture CO2 from a smokestack where CO2 is dilute. So you have to adapt the technology to that specific interface. The second challenge that we have seen in especially in the heavy industry, hard to abate sectors, steel, cement, waste, refining, petrochemicals, CHPs, is the lack of availability of space. We actually do not realize the real estate is actually one of the biggest challenges in these industries. I mean, some of the markets we work in, these companies actually don't even have space to build a car park for their employees. We're talking about 5,000 square meters, 6,000, 7,000 square meters of new space that might be required to build a carbon capture plant. So space is a problem. And the third problem is the cost. And the only way, from my perspective, the way we have seen cost reduction in the solar curve or the wind curve or other places is people have been able to standardize the technologies and mass produce them. So if you think about a solar panel, it's that same square panel produced again and again and again a million times, and then you reduce the cost down to almost nothing. So from Carbon Clean's perspective, that's really where we are focused on, where we are compressing the size of carbon capture equipments by 10 times. These towers, called the absorption tower, desorption towers, could be 45, 55, 60 meters tall. We're compressing them to less than 5 meters. And as we do that, we can put the carbon capture technology inside a box, inside a shipping container. You can get a 1 lakh MTPA carbon capture plant in 5 shipping containers. And as you do that, you can actually take the technology towards a mass manufacturing gigafactory setup where you try and optimize the cost on a production line rather than trying to optimize it that you're trying to build it and construct it on site. So I think that's one of the most effective ways of achieving cost reduction. And if I could take another minute or so, is to actually talk about integration with the sites. A lot of the sites today have opportunities, for example, heat availability, other utilities availability to achieve integration. However, that has to be looked at from the practical lens of what's the lowest cost of achieving decarbonization. When I work with lots and lots of cement companies here in India, I always tell them you should not be looking at carbon capture as a 100% solution, because carbon capture is one lever you can pull. You've got renewable electricity you can pull as a lever. You've got biomass supply chains you could probably use in your kiln. And when you capture carbon dioxide, it's biogenic carbon capture. So there are a couple of levers you can pull. Carbon capture is one of the levers. It's probably one of the most efficient levers that you can sort of pull within your control. But I think this needs to be looked at from a holistic lens of what else can we do on site. So maybe 2 things from my side.
That's a great insight. 2 things which are important takeaways: real estate, how you are reducing size, and second, carbon capture is not the only solution; it's a selective solution. I think that's great. Because we are talking about ecosystem readiness and we spoke about capture units, let me move to Mr. Saloma. And with his vast experience across the value chain, I think storage is one area that India has been looking at. We are not the ones who have upstream experience equal to the likes of the Middle Easterns or the Americans. So, with that background, how do you believe we can actually make the ecosystem for storage ready equal to where it is globally? Do you look at international tie-ups, collaborations? What part of it to actually make it up to scale very quickly from a storage standpoint?
Good morning, Namaskar. Thank you for having me in this panel session first, and also inviting Oil India to be part of this. And okay, Hetal, coming to your question, specifically with respect to the storage part of it, I mean, we still have to understand, as you rightly mentioned, that CCUS is a very, very new and different concept for the entire oil and gas industry in India. I'm not talking about the global part of it. And the readiness for it actually has to be embraced by the companies. And if you talk about storage, I think the upstream oil and gas companies, for example, Oil India or ONGC, I think they are best placed to be the conduit or the agent for storage, because when you talk about storage, it requires real subsurface knowledge and expertise. And as you rightly mentioned, we possess the expertise and the experience of the subsurface imaging, understanding of the geology. But when you talk about the CCUS part of it, the storage part of it, it's a totally different ballgame, and the experience lies with the other companies around the globe. And so the biggest challenge when it comes to the storage is the geological challenge. And the geological challenge in the sense that the trapping mechanism has to be almost perfect, the sealing mechanism has to be almost perfect. So your understanding of the reservoir, if it's a amenable reservoir for storage of CO2 for the long term, you have to be that sure about it. So that expertise and the experience we have to build in-house. And to start with, we have to take help, and we have to have a hand-holding assistance from experts through collaboration. And from oil and gas perspective, I can say that that's why I said we have embraced this already. And for the CCUS goals, we are roughly emitting about 1.5 million tons of carbon equivalent on as a scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. We have set a target of 2040 for net zero. We have already lined up about 25,000 crores, which is about $3 billion investment for net zero targets. This include small things like zero gas flaring by the end of this year to actually demonstrate a CCS project. We are already doing some pilot EORs, but for storage, we are already working on it. Actually, just as we speak, we have just completed a feasibility study just 48 hours ago, and the preliminary reports are out. We are examining a reservoir for permanent storage of CO2 to demonstrate the first of its kind project in India. I don't want to, get the cat out of the bag right now, but then yes, we are definitely doing it. And and for the experience and the collaborations that we talk about, obviously we have established a Center of Excellence for Energy Studies. Now, this center is exclusively going to work for alternate energy, like CCUS, geothermal. Geothermal is hot, so we'll talk about that in a separate forum, and other alternate energy sources. And yeah, with this, of course, the biggest challenge that will come again will be the cost. And if you want me to break it up, what I've seen is roughly 50 to 60% of the total cost goes on the capture part. Maybe 10 to 20 to 25% will go for the transportation, and then another 25 to 30% goes for the storage part of it. So the entire economics has to work out. And most importantly, people will have to understand that just because we are an oil and gas player in the upstream business, we have the facilities, doesn't mean that the same facilities and the same wells are candidates for CCUS or CCS, because this has to be carbon friendly, CO2 friendly. So we might have to revamp the entire infrastructure or retrofit, and that's where the additional capex comes in. So these are the challenges that we are foreseeing in the near future.
Okay,
Thank you very
you. So a good takeaway over there. There are already work that's in progress in terms of identifying reservoir capabilities, and collaborations are on the way. Now that brings me to Henrik. Mr. Saloma spoke about international cooperation, India's readiness levels in terms of storage. Your organization has had end-to-end capabilities of assisting in the capture as well as the injection part of it. So would like to know that when you look at the ecosystem from an overall perspective, internationally, where is it that you have seen the challenges the most in terms of readiness? And what do you advise to a country that is actually trying to just set up that entire infrastructure?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me. I would say that the focus should be on the entire value chain. And the the CCUS value chain requires many different decision points from government, financiers, but it's sort of the policy framework for the entire value chain that is important. And actors who are emitters, they will only invest if they see an evacuation and a storage opportunity. And while storage actors are reluctant to invest until they see sort of real capture projects coming online. So there is a coordination challenge in a way to make the value chain happen. And government is the actor that can sort of help and facilitate that, with the longship value chain in Norway as one example for sort of a coordinated approach. Another one would be the two clusters in the UK, where you have pipeline solutions and decisions both on capture part and evacuation, and the storage will then come.
Okay, so establishing roles and responsibilities for different parts of the value chain is an important aspect that you believe one needs to focus on. As a part of the ecosystem, sometimes what gets ignored is also the utilization bit of it. Coals to chemicals is a big story in China. And, we have efforts which are on in India to make that possible. Balaji has two coal gasification projects which also have government incentives in place. So I would like to understand from you in terms of readiness of the utilization part of the value chain, because that can actually improve viability of the projects given that you have revenues linked to the products which are being established. So how do you see in terms of readiness of the utilization part of the value chain when you are yourself involved in implementing a coal to chemical project?
Thank you, Hetal, and thank you for inviting us to this forum. And like I just started with China's story. I mean, India and China in energy mix are similar. Like India is net importer of oil, natural gas, petrochemicals. The only natural resource in abundance is coal that we have. So in coal gasification is basically the carbon conversion from coal and utilization to make a value-added products. And China has been gasifying about 350 million metric ton of coal to produce 95% of its urea, about 80 to 90% of its methanol, and then olefins and MTO, about 80% of hydrogen. So whole, if you see the China's chemical sector, coal gasification is playing a huge role. And that's where, like for India, it is critical, and government of India have national mission on coal gasification, where there's a goal to gasify 100 million metric ton of coal by 2030. As part of that, and your question is very relevant, the utilization part. So basically the carbon conversion in classical gasification, so there is some loss of carbon still. So here what innovation we are doing, is apart from the classical coal gasification, the CCUS, using utilization part of it. So, and optimizing the processes is very important. So we are aiming to gasify 5 million metric ton of coal to produce syngas, and then in phase 1 to produce hydrogen and ammonium nitrate, and in phase 2 methanol, acetic acid, DME, and other derivatives. The other project that interesting to, this is a utilization of carbon in certain products, but in fact for us, CCU is bringing more revenue rather than the cost. So we are seeing CCU not as a challenge but opportunity to bring a new revenue stream, because as mentioned by most of the people, that carbon capture cost is one of the critical element. But in gasification being a pre-combustion capture, for me the CO2 capture is almost free. For me the cost is about $5. When you compare to other like carbon capture costs with other technologies, it ranges from $45 to $100. So that's where also my appeal here to is any technologies which are viable after carbon, after CO2 capture, the utilization part, they become much more economically viable with gasification. So here we are adding green hydrogen to the CO2. And one of the innovation that we are doing is we are replacing ASU. As you know, in gasification, we need a lot of oxygen. In typical any hydrogen, green hydrogen projects, as we know, the reality is that green hydrogen project, there are no real off-takers, like long-term off-takers with the high cost. That's the reality. And that's where, government and everybody is pushing. So here we got a case for a concrete guaranteed off-take for green hydrogen, because in electrolyzer, the oxygen is wasted right now, vented most of the time. It is difficult to transport and store. So I need a lot of oxygen for oxidizing the coal in coal gasification. So we decided to replace ASU by electrolyzer, so that I get both oxygen and hydrogen. And I use that hydrogen to mix into the CO2 to create a value-added chemicals like ethanol and SAF and the whole value chain. So for us, even by adding the cost of CCU, my overall economics is getting better than being a problem. So this is what we are trying to do. But the coal gasification and utilization, I think that for India, for a country like India, where in a COP26, our Panchamrut has been our strategy that for the climate change, affordability, scalability, availability, and sustainability. So in that, coal gasification plus CCUS is the way for India to lead to Atmanirbhar Bharat and utilize the natural resources in cleaner and net zero way.
Absolutely. So energy security clearly remains focus for most of the projects that India is driving. I will come back to you on that one because that's a very interesting piece. But the second leg of our panel discussion was to look at cost. So I'm going to get a little more deeper, specific questions linked to specific areas of the value chain on how it can actually improve viability of projects. So I'm going to start with Saloma, you. One of the ways of reducing the cost of the entire CCUS value chain is also having EOR based projects, and it has been a common trend internationally to support EOR based projects. We hear drill, 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 baby pretty frequently nowadays. Now, carrying from that legacy, how do you look at CO2 EOR based projects and their ability to generate revenues and sustain viability of the existing projects that you have? So, any insights that you would want to give on that front?
Thank you, Hetal, again for that question. EOR, enhanced oil recovery processes for oil and gas production to increase the recovery factor, is an expensive process because it's a tertiary mode of extraction, which includes obviously high initial capex, but then also the recurring OPEX. And I think if you look at all the EOR processes, CO2 is one of the most expensive, I would say, enhanced oil recovery process. And therefore, we really need to understand the entire techno-economic viability of such projects. But as a national oil company, we are also obligated towards the nation to produce more oil and to the last barrel. And so even if the economics makes a sense for me that I earn at least $1 out of the entire project, it's fine with me. That's my personal perception. And so in order to do that, as I said, there's a dearth of, again, experience and expertise within the country or within the company. And that's why we, like I said, collaborate. Collaboration is one word I use very often. We collaborate. And we collaborated with some of the best institutes for enhanced oil recovery projects to see the actual techno-economic viability of such projects. So we have, I have been mentioning this earlier also, we have collaborated with the University of Houston. We have collaborated with Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh. Currently, we are working on a project where we are collaborating with Texas A&M University for enhanced oil recovery processes. And also to build the existing, the experience and the expertise of the existing workforce. Like I said, we have set up the Center of Excellence for Energy Studies, and we have engaged with IFPEN, France, for capacity building of our people. So even as we speak, there are quite a few training classes and workshops which are being conducted in the center, even as we speak. And the government even realizes this now in India. So they have actually come up with an EOR policy where EOR projects are incentivized. And I wouldn't like to go into the details of the policy, but seeing that the urgency is there and the country requires it, the entire policy is being revisited, and we are going to have a new EOR policy announced very soon. And so those are the things which the government has taken a lot of initiatives on. And I think you must be also aware that the Niti Aayog is also working on the overall CCUS policy framework for the country. And even as we speak, I think within a few months' time, we will have some policy in the country as well, which will support not only EOR projects, but all CCUS projects.
Okay, so EOR projects along with support from the government, I'm going to come back to that one because government support is one of the most crucial things that we have seen globally that matters for valuations and returns on projects. But before I come back to you, let me take it to Aniruddha because we are talking about cost and the innovative technology and path-breaking process changes that you have been able to bring about through your organization has enabled implementing retrofit units or even lowering cost. In your experience of implementing these technologies across sectors, which sector do you believe you have seen that cost reduction happens substantially and could be an important area for Indian emitters to look at when they are looking at capture technologies?
Sure, Hetal. So I'll probably start from the operating asset experience we have in India. We have 3 operating plants in India. One it is a coal-fired power station, one is at a steel plant, and the other one is at a chemical facility. And we have 2 more under construction right now. where we will capture carbon dioxide, all for utilization in this case, localized utilization. I think India has some very specific advantages when you're trying to think about the cost of carbon capture, and I've mentioned about a couple of points. I think a cost of about $30 per ton of CO2 is very much achievable in India, and I think that's what sort of frame of mind we should be thinking about. However, I would say in terms of the sectors that have the best opportunity to reduce the cost of carbon capture, I would say probably steel is probably the best placed sector because of the availability of the hot temperatures around. You can actually find quite a lot of outlets where you can find 120, 130, 40 degrees Celsius heat available at steel plants, same as cement plants as well. I think there is opportunity to use cement plants and the biogenic waste together to achieve what we call as negative carbon, using carbon removal credits that could be brought in. I would actually sort of complement this by saying that we should not only just be looking at the cost element, we should actually also be looking at the opportunity element of CCUS. I think you may know, and a couple of people here may know about this policy of CBAM as well, which is essentially a policy that if anybody exports products to Europe, they pay a carbon tax, a European carbon tax at the European borders. This tax in Europe ranges today between, call it like 75 euros to 95 euros per ton, depending upon what's going on. So in India, if you can actually capture carbon dioxide at $30, do something with it for another 30 or transport and store it, I think there is an opportunity out there for Indian exporters to say, A, we're going to decarbonize, B, we're going to do it at a cost that makes more sense. And then at the same point of time, it has a direct impact on the bottom line as well. And I think the third element of the cost opportunity is actually the exports market. So the capacity you mentioned, 400 million tons per year of carbon capture capacity that could potentially come online over the next 10 years. If you think about some of the largest licensors in the carbon capture space, the total hardware that's available today, it's about $20 billion over the next 10 years. That is enough to actually deal with a fourth of that capacity, which means there is a potential opportunity to manufacture and export another $40 to $60 billion of hardware over next 10 years, right here, right now. And if you think about the space, the decarbonization space, different countries are kind of carving it to themselves, right? I mean, EVs and batteries is mostly a China and a US story. Green hydrogen is mostly a Germany, Europe, and China story. Solar is definitely a China story. Wind is a lot more China and a little bit Europe story. So I think as a country, we'll have to think about what is it that we are going to own and we're going to dominate that space. I think here is an opportunity. We've got steel, we've got other manufacturing capabilities, we've got electronics, we've got our own industry, we've got exports. I mean, there's a huge opportunity to go and get it.
Yeah, that's really encouraging. Also because the steel value chain in India is something that has BOF based plants, which are amongst the highest emitters. And the age of an average steel plant in India is much lower than what you'll see in the European counterpart. So you're not going to see those assets vanish. And if you are therefore having CCUS or CCS as a technology that can make things possible for the BOF plants, that is going to be extremely important for the Indian steel ecosystem. So I'm happy to hear that costs are encouraging in that part of the value chain. Now, let me very quickly move to Fred. If you have to deep dive into one key area of India and your experience in cement or power sector, because I hear a lot of, activities which have been done around those areas. Could you give us instances on how one can improve bankability of CCUS projects in general in these sectors? Cement and power being one of the sectors where, costs are amongst the highest. You would definitely need government support. Globally, we have seen that, whether it's NZT power in UK or other power plants in other parts of the world. So India, which is going to be a thermal power economy for a meaningful period, what is it that they can do to actually lower cost over there?
So you're right? I mean, today we are involved in a number of projects in the cement, in the power sector, in the waste to energy, in the biomass to energy. And we're involved both from a carbon capture standpoint as well as a carbon storage standpoint. And even on one of those projects, we're involved in the, let's say, digital twinning of the value chain, the CO2 molecule from the emission source all the way to the reservoir storage. And what's quite common to those projects, in order for these projects to be bankable, you need a number of sources of capital. So the government funding is quite fundamental, because effectively public funding helps unlock private capital on those projects, and that's essential. But as well, what we realize is for these projects to be financeable, for these projects to be bankable and attract capital at a reasonable, let's say, at a reasonable cost, you do need an additional instrument. So that additional instrument can come in the form of carbon removals, you generate credits, or it can come in the form of carbon offsets that you end up trading on the voluntary carbon market. So I think for India, this is a huge opportunity. I mean, I think having, mechanism to trade carbon offsets out of projects in India opens a new instrument, a new vehicle in order to bring a monetization channel. And obviously you will need, especially early on, I mean, today you could say we're still at the early stage of the CCS activity in India. You would need some level of public support, some level of public funding in the form of subsidies, in the form of preferential loans. But all of that are needed in order to make project financeable, bankable. And as well, what we realize is there's huge amount of efficiencies that you can get across the value chain by building the right partnerships to serve those projects. These are complex projects when you look at the number of stakeholders between technology company, PC partners, and so on. And effectively, I mean, having companies that have done it before, that have technologies that have been developed, that have been mature, that are actually bankable, because at the end of the day, financiers will not provide underwriting for those projects unless if the technologies actually come with performance guarantees and at commercial scale. You need all of that. So it takes a number of actors, it takes a number of players, it takes huge government support. But I think in India, actually, the ingredients are there, right? I mean, I think India has the potential to develop a make in India CCS economy that is real. I mean, Aniruddha mentioned steel sector. I think that's one clear one. Cement sector. I mean, there's a good GCCA study that was done on the east side of India with all the cement plants and eventually storage in offshore in KG Basin. You look at that. I mean, fundamentally, there are already opportunities for India to become a material CCS play.
Okay, so I think the cat is out of the box. Very clearly, government support and subsidies, grants are going to play a role. Just to give you a perspective, when Wood Mackenzie does analysis on valuations of projects, almost 190 valuations across the CCS value chain that we have done shows that at least 30 to 50% of the levelized revenues are actually government grants and supports globally as on today. So that's going to be very, very important, especially for sectors like power. Now, I'm going to really rush to Henrik. One of the ways of reducing cost is having hubs. And everybody has been speaking about storage hubs. But given the kind of capacities that we have on the emitter side also, there might be a need for having emitter hubs, which can actually aggregate carbon from various sources and have a scale built in on the emitter side. Any such instances from globally where you have had experience of aggregating carbon, processing it together, compressing it together such that the cost of the emitter on an average goes down? Any instances that you would like to highlight, Henrik?
Yeah, I think the experience we have in Norway is a case in point. We have, together with our partner SLB Capturi, we are completing the carbon capture facility at a cement plant, and we are now initiating a carbon capture facility at a waste-to-energy plant. And those two projects are an example of carbon being picked up and then brought to storage in the same way. And a cost synergy, which we see is more and more important, is that the technical standards and actually the standard for the CO2 itself is clarified in advance, because there's capital going into the capture part, there's capital going into the storage parts, there's capital going into the tanks. And having a defined standard for what type of cleanliness you need to accomplish will increase predictability and avoid uncertainty and avoid change orders if that standard is amended later. So that's one thing. And then the other one is for the industry to gather, mobilize around what is good enough. Coming from an oil and gas perspective, technical standards are, belt and bracers, but CO2 as a medium is different. There is not that much need for explosion protection, for example, compared to a hydrocarbon molecule. So really thinking through the technical standards that apply across the value chain is also a way to get costs down.
Okay, cool. So some use cases internationally over there. We have last 4 minutes left, so I'm going to quickly go on to Balaji. You have the coal gasification projects. Coal gasification projects are known for having large capital outlays. A scale-based coal gasification project could cost as much as $300 to $500 million per MTPA. And I'm talking about scale, which means you have to put a 3 or a 5 MTPA project. And on that, for the high ash content coal that India has, if you use the not so commercial fluid bed gasifiers, then your cost will go up further. So you need to really be sure about A, the value proposition, and B, the government support that you are deriving. Now you have got some government support for your projects under the 15% CAPEX subsidy scheme for coal gasification. Plus, because of green hydrogen, there might be other state subsidies available, interest subsidized loans that would be available. So if you have to look at an overall project level, what is the kind of government subsidy that actually makes at an overall level a project like yours viable? Is 15% enough? It's closer to 30, 40? What's the number looking like?
So very good question. And in fact, I mean, as you said, the coal gasification is high capex project. CCU is a high capex project, both. I mean, and now here we are combining both. So government support is very critical. And I'm happy to share that Government of India have supported us. Like yesterday, we got a letter of award for 130 million close to for under a VGF. And also state government of Maharashtra had given us about $2.8 billion of support over next few years. So we got about my project. So our project, as you correctly said, so our project cost is about for 5 million metric ton of coal gasification is about $3 billion. And we have got support close to that, same investment amount in different forms from government. One of the notable support from Maharashtra government we got is a interest subvention, 5% interest subvention. So state government will pay the interest of 5% for next 15 years, and then 150% of taxes we are getting back, and royalty waivers and different kind of supports. And from central government, it is a grant, so which comes upfront and more useful. So government support is critical. What we are looking for is a CCU policy, as mentioned by a colleague, which is underway. We were expecting in this budget, but hopefully by next budget, that policy, which will sweeten the CCU projects. And we will have the best advantage because our capture cost is already captured in my gasification project almost. So I get a free CO2 capture. So almost. So this kind of technology optimization on capex and opex is one critical element. Second is scaling. These all projects are like gasification or CCUS at scale. They are viable only at scale. So bridging that gap is very critical. So selecting project right location, right support is very important. And third is what we realize that we have to have a multi-product strategy. A typical gasification project till now in India, everybody was thinking, okay, coal to urea, coal to methanol, and you do the like you see this cost is going. Commercial viability is problem. So we have to have a multi-product strategy, both hydrogen and methanol value chains, and ability to have a different product so that your economics and ROI is also the risk of offtake with the different, it is also hedged. So these are few things I think which which are very critical. And I mean, in fact, through coal gasification, we are saying that we are also going to enable the green hydrogen ecosystem. So by optimizing, so coal gasification with CCU, green hydrogen. So this, for India, I feel that this is a very good opportunity. I would say, like, the target is to gasify 100 million metric ton of coal. And if you see the need, if you have to replace the oil and natural gas imports, there is opportunity to gasify 1400 million metric ton coal per annum. So this is a few $100 billion opportunity right here. And we can share our story, and we are seeing this is a financially viable. With the government support for this kind of project is right now good, and we are looking for more support in CCU to make it even better for meeting our own needs. And truly, in the kind of energy security is very important for India, and using our own natural resources. So this, I think, is a gasification plus CCU to make a industrial decarbonization to achieve India's energy security is the roadmap that we see that practically it's possible today.
Okay. So gasification is clearly a big opportunity for India, and coal gasification could itself have an opportunity of 150 to 250 MTPA of CCUS opportunity being created. So everybody's going to watch out for there, but there are enough number of critics as well, because say, for instance, the blue hydrogen that is being produced through coal gasification ends up having after capture higher emissions than other formats. How are we going to abate that part of it is going to be crucial when we go for coal gasification. But when we are going for that part, I think, one key message to the government for the CCUS policy to be formed, in order, what is the one message that you would want to give to the Indian government for CCUS policy that is coming up? We can go up in order to conclude the panel discussion.
Well, if I can start, I would say that policy has to unlock access to private capital, which means effectively it needs to be bankable.
Okay, access to private capital.
Yeah, I think unless and until the government supports this, I don't think it's ever going to fly. So you look at the Americas, you look at the Europes, this is where the government incentivizes CCUS projects. But then I would also like to add a caveat. India being constituting about 17% of the total world's population, and responsible for about less than 4% of the total CO2 emissions so far. So here we are trying to industrialize, and then we are being told that you also have to decarbonize. Mm-hmm. So the Americas and the Europes have to come and help this happen in the country. And organizations like the World Bank, maybe they are the ones who should actually drive these projects along with the government in India. That's my take.
So government support with help from international agencies is what he says. Yes, Henrik.
I would say value chain thinking and incentives in the terms that emissions should cost.
Incentives for enabling true cost. Well, okay, Aniruddha.
I would say maybe long-term clarity. I think just one and done is not enough generally. You need at least 15, 20-year clarity on this. People are going to be making long-term capital investment decisions.
So long-term policy clarity is Aniruddha's focus. Balasaheb.
I would say, like title says, fast-tracking the policy and off-take support. The clear off-take support, and that is going to be very critical.
Fast-tracking policy and clear off-take support. I'll add to that CCTS has been launched and moved to support carbon pricing, which can really reduce government expenditure through a good carbon pricing infrastructure is going to be equally important. So with that, we close our panel. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your inputs.
Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you.